Hey guys, in this video I'll be comparing 2011 Phil Heath and 2023 Derek Lunsford. I've been wanting to do this comparison for some time now due to the fact that they share lots of similarities from behind, so I thought that comparing their first Olympia winning versions would be pretty interesting to see. Now before the video does start, a like and sub would be much appreciated as it helps support the channel. With that all being said though, let's get into this video. Alright, starting off this video, we have the front double biceps pose, and here you can see that they both present some outstanding attributes. Looking at Derek, he has one of the best midsections out of any Olympia champion, showcasing an incredible V-taper and possessing some impressive lats. His quads look deeply cut and separated, and his arms, while not freaky or ultra conditioned, do look pretty big. That being said though, Phil has some of the best arms of all time, handily beating Derek in the size, separation, and shape departments in my opinion. He also has some comparable lats, yet falls behind in the midsection and the overall taper due to his lack of width. Derek has always impressed me with his sheer shoulder-to-shoulder width, especially on his smaller frame, and he does expose Phil in that aspect. Phil does have the better set of quads though, showcasing comparable separation, but with more overall mass and sweep along with a better set of calves. Personally, I think Phil takes this pose due to his more conditioned, genetically superior arms, as well as his overall polish and dryness. Derek looks amazing though, and he has a great overall silhouette. However, he lacks symmetrical conditioning from head to toe to compete with Phil in this pose. The front lat spread is a very competitive shot as neither are pulling off a masterclass in the pose. Phil does look to be at his best in terms of the pose, presenting an aesthetic midsection, amazing quads, and great overall condition. However, his huge arms do dominate the pose, making his lats look like an afterthought. The same can be said for Derek to a certain extent, as his arms also obscure his rather good lats. However, this can also be attributed to the poor lighting at the show. Looking really closely shows that he does fill out the pose really well, arguably more than Phil. Now, the midsections are about the same in terms of aesthetics and definition, but I'd give the lower body to Phil due to the size and completeness that he has. The upper half is close since Phil is super massive and bubbly, but his large arms do detract from the focal point of the pose, whereas Derek looks more complete and wide, but he doesn't have the same size or separation. Although I don't necessarily like either of them, I think objectively Phil would win. He looks more comfortable in the pose and flows, rather well considering he looked horrendous in, he looked pretty bad in this pose after, let's say 2013. His sheer size and conditioning is really too much for Derek, although Derek does look very comparable in the silhouette and presentation. The side chest is actually much more competitive than I thought it would have been. I thought that Phil would have wiped the floor with Derek, however, Derek is arguably beating Phil in the lower half, and does showcase a great chest and huge arms from the side. Starting with the side leg, you can see that Derek shows way more separation in the glutes. The tie-ins are all more pronounced, and he shows, much more detail and dryness in the side quad. Looking upstairs, Phil does have Derek beat in the brachialis size and separation. However, Derek has a comparable amount of size in the total arm package, along with a similar amount of roundness in the delt. I'd say that Phil narrowly wins in the chest in terms of size, but easily wins in terms of separation. He also destroys Derek in that far arm as his tricep just sticks out like crazy. Neither have cinched in and super tight midsections, however, Phil does show way more detail in the serratus and core than Derek. When looking at the total package though, I think Phil definitely takes this one. Sure, Derek has a similar amount of size and does beat Phil in the leg, however, Phil's overall package is far superior and he looks way more complete. Derek really needs to figure out his upper body conditioning if he even wants to stand a chance in the front and side shots. Now, I know I was just, hating on Derek's upper body conditioning. However, from behind, it seems as if he really figured things out. His back looks just as conditioned and just as dry as Phil's. His arms show very similar levels of definition, and his lower body is just as peeled. Looking at the backs, I would definitely give Derek the advantage here as his traps are thicker, his lats are wider, and he has just as much density as Phil does. Lower backs look just as crisp for both, and the glutes on these two are really insane with those deep cuts and striations. Phil easily takes the arms though, as he has far better biceps and triceps, not to mention his forearms, but the legs are a different story. Like I said, the glutes are basically even as both present near perfect development and separation. However, Phil wins the hamstrings and calves, while Derek does win the outer quad sweep and silhouette. This one is extremely close, however, I think Phil just barely wins. He has Derek beat in the lower half by the smallest margin, wins in the arms, but does lose in the back. I am very impressed with Derek here, as he not only beat Phil in the back itself, but he also put up a very solid fight everywhere else. The rear lat spread may just be the saving grace for Derek, as now that the arms are out of the equation, he can put that superior back on full display. I say superior since he beats Phil in the width department, has wider traps, just as good separation, and a large back overall. I mean, a much larger back than Phil's. You can see it for yourself. Lower bodies are close once again, however, Derek does look just as dry and separated as Phil, just without those freaky hamstrings. He has all the size he needs and beats Phil in the outer quad sweep, so in my opinion, Derek would win this shot. His back poses are very dominant and impressive, and it is very commendable that he can stack up with arguably Phil's best version from behind. The side tricep is a great shot for both of these guys, as they both have great arms, side legs, and posing execution. I will say that it is not a, necessarily fair comparison due to Phil's unconventional posing technique. However, it is still close enough to accurately judge. Starting with the lower bodies, I'd give Derek an edge due to the prior outcome in the side chest, and even here you can see that he has more detail in the quad and glute. Arms are close, as both have huge total arm packages. However, Phil definitely wins the tricep, as it is genetically superior in terms of insertions. Delts, chest, and midsections are practically even. However, I will point out that Derek's lower midsection looks a little bit odd, and it does protrude out a bit. Looking at the pose, though, in its entirety, reveals that Phil looks the most aesthetic, where Derek looks nice in his conventional side tricep. In all honesty, while Derek does look good and may win this pose with the new IFBB guidelines for this pose, Phil does look, much better, much more aesthetic when looking at the overall shot, so I would have to give him the win. The Aban Thigh is an interesting pose for both, since neither look phenomenal. Phil has great quads and calves, superior conditioning, and more mass, but lacks a solid V-taper due to his narrow clavicle width, and doesn't have amazing abs nor lats in the pose. Derek has an incredible V-taper and great lats, but doesn't have amazing quads from the front in terms of outer quad sweep, and isn't hitting the conventional Aban Thigh, opting for a vacuum. Many would argue that a vacuum isn't an Aban Thigh. However, I've always had the belief that bodybuilding is all about artistic expression, and that you should be allowed to execute the pose to highlight your strengths and hide your weaknesses, obviously in a reasonable manner. That being said, Derek has an amazing set of abs, but he does look 10 times better when pulling a vacuum. Honestly, guys, Derek looks much better than Phil in the overall silhouette, and has a much better V-taper with comparable quad separation and size, so I would give him this pose. Here's the last pose, the most muscular, and this might just be a dominant win for Phil in the shot. Phil's delt, chest, and arms all look twice as thick and round, and he shows much more separation in the arms and chest. Derek does have some great delt conditioning, huge traps, and great quads. However, he does fall behind in his upper body conditioning and size. His chest does look soft and flat in comparison to Phil, and his arms, while pretty big, are lacking in wow factor. There really isn't much else to be said here, as Phil does mop the floor with this pose. Alright guys, that about does it for this video. Although Phil basically, demolished Derek in terms of the number of poses won, Derek did compete extremely well in most of the poses. His downfall could be attributed to his lackluster conditioning in the upper half, and overall softness in comparison to Phil, who had amazing conditioning, and of course his trademark 3D roundness. There were lots of similarities from behind, especially in the back insertions and lower body conditioning, and I genuinely believe that Derek could become one of the best in the rear double and rear lat, given some time. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this video. Let me know down below what you thought, and if there are any ideas you would like to see turn into a video, and I'll see you all in the next one. Thanks for watching.